392 apartments. Each one has their story. Some of these stories have not come out yet. We would like the professionals to be able to be left to do their job, and we do not want to move in to a site which is being restructured.
Everyone, today, thank you very much for joining us, and I know that you all appreciate that today's report is very important for the owners and residents of Opal Tower and for the wider community who are indeed very concerned about what has occurred. Joining us here today is Shady Eskender, the Chairman of the Owners Corporation of Opal Tower, Professor Mark Hoffman, Dean of the Faculty of Engineering at the University of New South Wales, and Emeritus Professor John Carter, who have been leading the independent investigation that I commissioned in the days after this incident occurred. Also with us today is the Secretary of the Department of Planning, Carolyn McNally. But before I go into details from our professors, I first want to thank the owners and residents for their patience and stoicism in how they've been managing throughout the past few difficult weeks. None of us can start to comprehend the disruption this has caused, particularly at this time of year, and I thank them all sincerely for allowing the government's investigation team and other teams to get on with their work. I also want to acknowledge the work of Shady and the Executive Committee of the Owners Corporation. I met with them between Christmas and New Year to discuss what had been taking place, how we could support them and the residents, and I was incredibly impressed with how professionally and sensibly they were managing this very challenging situation. From the very beginning, the government has taken this issue very, very seriously. Now, I think it's important to note that this situation started on Christmas Eve nearly 3 weeks ago today. The immediate priority for everyone, of course, was the safety and welfare, and to ensure that safety and welfare of residents in and around the building. And I'd like to acknowledge and pay tribute to the emergency services and first responders for construction standards. We also commissioned our experts to tell us if this building had issues with its construction or design, and what would we need to do differently to make sure that this was a once-off occurrence. We've asked our 3 highly respected and independent engineer experts to conduct an investigation into the basis of the failure so we can understand what happened and why, the immediate steps that need to occur to ensure the safety of this building for the occupants, and also to make recommendations on what needs to happen going forward to avoid incidents like this occurring again. This expert team has made multiple visits to Opal Tower site to inspect the damage. It's conducted reviews of the design of relevant sections of the building, construction records and quality control records, and they've met with the builders, the building structural designer and builder, with the representatives of the Owners Corporation. But before I introduce Professors Hoffman and Carter to provide insight into their preliminary findings, I want to make sure we are very clear that this is an interim report. We don't have the final answers to our 3 questions, but we also know that we need to provide some initial guidance to the residents and owners of Opal Tower and the community more generally. So I'll ask our professors to make some comments on their findings, and then I'll open up for discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. My name's Mark Hoffman, and this is John Carter, and we've been looking at this issue since the 27th of December, as the Minister mentioned. It is a very complex issue, and there are many parties involved. And we're still collecting information and we're still working on it, so this is very much an interim report. Nevertheless, we have got a number of findings and opinions which we would like to share because we feel it's important to keep everybody updated. The first of these is that the building is overall structurally sound and not in danger of collapse. However, there is significant rectification works which are required to repair and strengthen some parts of the building. We've identified a number of design and construction issues, a combination of which caused the observed damage to some structural members of the Opal Tower building. But we need further information to ascertain which of these was materially important for the damage that was observed. There has been a proposal for stage rectification of the damaged sections, and we agree with this in principle. However, we recommend that the proposed changes be checked by an independent and qualified structural engineer to check that the final proposal in detail before those rectification works commence. We also believe that further analysis should be undertaken on the structural design of the hob beams and associated structural elements with similar details, and consideration be given to strengthening those, dependent upon what that analysis shows. Our view is that the viability of residents re-entering the building extends beyond the structural issues which we've considered. Nevertheless, it's our recommendation that the building designer should ensure that no structural member has been overloaded as a result of the observed damage, and this should be checked closely before anyone residents re-enter the building. So I wish to emphasise it is an interim report. We've been able to make a lot of progress, but there's still more work to go.
Minister, can I firstly ask you, what does this have to do with the Department of Planning?
Well, the Department of Planning stepped up to the plate, being a large part of government with the capabilities when this occurred to ensure the safety and welfare of the residents. That was our prime concern. On ensuring their safety, of course, we're now ensuring that the welfare of the residents is looked after as we arrive at what would be the final report, and ensure that when those residents do move back in, they move back into a building that is safe, structurally sound, and they're looked after in the meantime.
So at this stage, there's no recommendation as to whether residents should be allowed back in?
Well,
in our report, we've outlined some matters which should be checked before residents are allowed to be moved, wish to move back in, and we would recommend that they have those matters investigated and checked. We've outlined them in the report, and we're very happy to work with the residents and any engineers to actually further clarify that.
And is that all residents, or just the residents on those two affected levels?
That would be all residents.
So, Minister, residents were told last week by the builder that they could start returning home. Is the state government going to intervene in that and make sure that they don't return home until the building is declared safe?
well, the building has been declared structurally safe, but it's important that we have a look. There's been a huge amount of anxiety amongst residents, of course, as to what has occurred. Whether or not the residents move back into the building is a matter between the residents and the builder. And I completely understand the residents' reluctance in some cases to move back in to what is essentially going to be for some time a building site.
For those people who have actually moved in, did the Owners Corporation recommend they move out, given today's interim report?
So a meeting was held last Saturday, and most owners, 300 plus owners of the site, attended that meeting. Overwhelmingly, we have no reason, and we will not return to the site until it is set and built as we had initially purchased them. No resident wants to live on a construction site. No owner deserves to have this happen to them anywhere in Australia. We have suffered. I can say on behalf of all the owners, people were buying into the Australian dream, and unfortunately this has become an Australian nightmare for us. There are 392 apartments. Each one has their story. Some of these stories have not come out yet. We would like the professionals to be able to be left to do their job, and we do not want to move in to a site which is being restructured and works are being done until it is fully rectified and fully complete. And engineers have said on letterhead it is safe for reoccupation. As I have been saying, the tree is not going to fall, but the branches are cracking.
How much is this going to cost, and who's going to pay?
Well, I can't tell you exactly how much this is going to cost, but I can assure you that it's not just legislation in place, but there are certainly issues that will be played out between the developer as well as the builder with respect to this, and I prefer not to comment on that any further. It's not in any way of our jurisdiction.
Professor Hoffman, can I ask you, the stage rectification that the builders and the developer are talking about, have they given you a time frame, and what are some of the specifics around that?
They have given us what they're proposing to do, but they have not given us a time frame.
what would you, for what they've proposed, you know, you've got a lot of experience in this area, what would you say a reasonable time frame is in what they've told you that they're proposing to do?
It would certainly stretch over many weeks, but I should also emphasise that before they commence, we recommend that their proposal be checked by an independent engineer. So it's difficult to say how they're going to stage this and how long it will take.
What was the initial design for these sections checked itself? The design that included these areas with the whole beams and the panels?
There's a process where all designs are checked by the designer, and the designer is a major international firm. We have not so far come across any further checking that was done, but we're still investigating.
Professor Hoffman, you said the viability of residents returning to the tower extends past the structural problems. Can you explain what you meant by that?
That's essentially a matter for the owners and the builders, but Shady actually alluded to some of those issues around essentially being resident in what is a construction site.
Minister, are you able to put in place any time frame on the builders to have these rectifications complete and those additional changes checked so residents can have some certainty?
Look, can I make it quite clear that there are two distinct areas here. There is planning that looks at the built form and its interaction with the surroundings. And then you have the construction side, which falls outside of the Department of Planning. We aren't able to put into place demands. What we need to do is to ensure this is done properly. We need to respect the process that is being undertaken both by our independent consultants, again, professors, some of the highest standing of engineers, not just in the country, but in the world. We need to respect the process that the builder must undertake, and also the process that the owners and the owners corporation will be partaking in.
You might not have any sort of regulatory levers to pull in terms of penalties, etc., as the planning minister, but this is one of the biggest developers in Sydney at the moment. If they're coming to you with a state significant development, unless this is sorted to your satisfaction, can you see yourself green lighting any developments in the future?
Well, the state significant development side is very robust, and indeed it is stronger than a normal development application that would go through a council. Can I say to the builder, it is in the builder's interest to rectify these issues. It is in the owner's interest for these issues to be rectified as soon as possible.
Shona, has this report outlined any issues with the planning process or the processes in New South Wales that you might look at reviewing?
Well, this report deals with construction and design, which is separate to planning totally. So certainly there are a raft of reforms that will be taken to the federal minister, the federal ministry, the COAG, in early February, it's my understanding. But in the meantime, the critical issue here is the safety and welfare of those residents.
Can you give us some guidelines on who the error lies with? Is that the builder or the engineer perhaps?
No, I can't, not this stage.
Shady, can I get your response to all of this? You've been brought to this press conference, and to be honest, I'm not a whole lot clearer about whether or not you should or should not be moving in and what this all means.
Let's put it simply. The well-being and safety of every resident who lives in this building is our #1 priority. We have from day one appointed independent engineers and an independent project manager to have eyes and ears on the entire process. From the inside, I can tell you that this building has not been by any engineer declared safe for reoccupation. We have heard that the building will not collapse. However, we as owners require that on independent letterheads, the independent engineers and the engineers who are in the building, how do we not know that in 3-4 years' time another panel on level 27, level 30, level 16 won't have the same thing occur again? It is in our opinion the building should be emptied and checked completely and appropriately so that the safety and the residents of the well-being can be guaranteed over the course of many years to come.
Where will the residents go in the meantime? Has there been arrangements made for everyone, or what's the plan?
We have been working with ICON on a daily basis to ensure that residents have accommodation and food needs met. However, pressure is now coming back to us to go back into the building, and we would support all owners, and all owners have expressed that we require ICON to continue to put us up maybe for another month or two in order for the process, as the Minister has said, to be respected.
Do you think that, do you have an issue and your owners have an issue with WSP being paid by ICON and ECO to independently look at this building?
It's a great question. It's all about who's in whose pocket at the end of the day. Now, WSP were the original. ICON had a design and construct contract with ECO. ECO have surprisingly been silent throughout this whole process, and I'd like to see what their response is. But they've been, unfortunately, very quiet, and we're very disappointed with them because we did purchase from ECO, we did not purchase from ICON. So, commenting on your question, WSP were the original engineers on the building. They are the ones who need to do the checks. They are the ones who ultimately have to rectify and ensure that any building works done by ICON are done in a standard and an appropriate manner based on their engineering calculations. So at the moment, they are unfortunately the ones who require to do all that work.
But if they did the original engineering and they're independently assessing their own work, aren't they just covering their backsides?
That's a great question, and unfortunately, this is the predicament we're in, which is why we've appointed our own independent engineer, Doug McMillan from Cardno. But unfortunately, there are still many questions that have been unanswered till this very day.
So how concerned are you about how much money you might have lost in your investment, and are you considering legal action?
Our priority at the moment is the safety and well-being of residents. In the course of time, of course there'll be legal action, compensation for loss of rent, compensation for hardship to owners. This will be a question that we will look at down the track, but at the moment, my priority is to ensure every resident and owner can enter a building which is safe.
Minister.
And just further to that, can I say that's one of the reasons we appointed three sort of eminent professors. Without fear or favour, they have conducted a report, which you see today, an interim report. There will be a final report. I made it quite clear that this report would be made public on our receipt of it. And that's what we're doing here today. But one of the reasons we've appointed those people is to ensure that there is openness and transparency on what happened, why it happened, and I want to know, and the people, not just at the tower, but more generally, want to know how we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again.
I'd like to add as well, on behalf of the owners, we really appreciate the support of the Honourable Minister Anthony Roberts in appointing these two independent engineers from the university to be able to support us throughout this process, which has been quite difficult. So we do thank him on behalf of the owners.
Minister, with respect.
Friday and do this press conference when residents had to wait the weekend and they're expecting to find out the results of the interim report on Friday. So why is it only on Tuesday?
Well, can I say that this report deals with a highly complex issue. This report, I've got to say, 3 weeks coming, is incredibly fast, and I want to thank the professors for the hard work that they have undertaken and my department has undertaken to get this to the form it is in now, in a 3-week period. We still have information coming in, and again, we need to respect the process. This is an incredibly complex issue that we are dealing with. We are still awaiting further information, as the professor stated, to come in, and that will be included in the final report. But it is critical that we do this right. And it means taking some time to ensure that we get it right. When you are going to make a report public, you make sure that you get it right. And that's why today we've ensured that in a 3-week turnaround period, we've got a pretty complex report answering quite a number of issues. But again, we are waiting on some further information for the final report.
Minister, are you still happy to blame certifiers, or do you consider that was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction from Ms. Keane? Did the issues run much deeper in the building process?
Well, can I just say with respect to that, the report is quite clear. It is dealing with the issues around design, construction and engineering.
To date, we've been focusing on what caused and safety issues. We have not so far seen anything regarding certification problems. However, we're still in a preliminary stage and we still have recommendations to make in the future.
Professor, how can you rule out, it seems quite clear that the foundation was not a concern, but there have been some made about the land that Sydney Olympic Park has been built on. How can you be so confident that the foundation didn't contribute?
I'll defer to John for that question.
The drawings clearly show that the building is founded on shale. It's a well-studied material in this city, and people, engineers know what types of loads and magnitude of loading they can place on that shale. The documentation we had available to us indicated a very good site investigation in my view. They understood the site, they knew what they were going to put the foundations on, and a geotechnical engineer visited the site every time they poured a new footing, and I think there are some 40 columns supported on shallow foundations, and as well as the central core of the tower. And that engineer certified that it was what the geotechnical engineer would call a medium strength shale, and the advised on what the maximum allowable loading should be on that shale. So, in summary, they did excavate down to fresh rock of good quality, and each footing was inspected by a geotechnical engineer. So at the time of construction, I have no doubt that everything was okay with the footings. We've got no evidence to say that the situation changed between the time the building was constructed and when the damage was observed. We did inspect the basement regions and the lower levels to look for cracks that you would expect to see if there was a footing with the foundations, a problem with the foundations. You'd expect to see some cracking in particularly the column floor slab intersections. There was none of that observed. So all I can say is there was no evidence that we saw that the footing foundations were a problem.
Can you explain why floor plates might crack?
What we believe has happened is that there's been some failure, as everyone's seen, of the hob beam, and the hob beam was connected to the floor plate. So where the hob beams have failed, there's also been neighbouring cracking in the floor plates.
But where does that start? Why do they crack in the first place?
That's what we're still investigating.
It says that the connection of the beams on level 10, level 4 were indicate factors of safety lower than required by standards. Was it built to the design, or was the design flawed?
This is something which we're still investigating. We've done some very preliminary calculations which have raised this as a potential issue. I should emphasise potential, and we're still awaiting further information as to the details of how it was designed, where we can then confirm or otherwise that potential of the preliminary calculations have shown.
Minister, does it concern you? You've got a situation where the two independent gentlemen that you've appointed have a differing opinion to WSP, the same mob being paid by the builder who has obviously done the wrong thing here. So are the residents going back in on the advice of WSP, or are they staying out on the advice of your professors?
Well, that's a matter for the residents. But that's one of the reasons I want to make it quite clear when this government responded in its timely fashion to ensure that everyone had access to independent advice. And you don't get any more independent than two of the most leading professors in engineering in the nation. And I want to commend them again and their teams for what they've done in conjunction with our own team from planning.
Will you and the state government be disseminating this, like handing out this interim report to residents though? How will they access it? Are they just expected to look it up online?
It's on the website, and we are, as Shady said, we are working closely with the Owners Corporation to ensure that they are kept abreast and informed of all our investigations and the outcomes of those investigations. And we are working with them and ensuring that they have access where required to the ongoing investigations.
Shady, do you suspect that potentially WSP Icon are trying to get you back in there so they can save themselves a quid in accommodation fees?
I mean, I think you have the answer to that question. Very clearly, there is an agenda that the builder would have, and of course, in turn, we'll be putting pressure on WSP, and we can see that occurring. So unfortunately, the pressure is coming on us as owners and residents who live in the building, and we want to say that we need to ensure that, as the Minister has said, we respect the process. Everybody who's in a position, whether they're an engineer, a surveyor, a certifier, have the time and ability to check this building thoroughly. The worst thing that can happen is that a couple of years down the track, we have an incident occur again.
You've got a situation where engineers, solicitors, designers, builders, developers, they all work on the same projects for hundreds of millions of dollars all around the city. do you really think that they're going to give any independent advice that might be detrimental to potentially their meal ticket down the track?
And this is why, as an owners committee, we have appointed our own independent engineer. We've appointed one of the largest firms in engineering, Cardno, and of course, as the Minister has said, he has supported us from day one by taking one of the two best minds in the university fields to have their eyes on this matter and help support us as we go through this process.
Shady, has your engineering, Doug McMillan, I think you said, has he given you any advice about the safety of the building, and what's his opinion on what's happening?
As I've mentioned, there is a statement that has been released by Cardno, and you can refer to that statement, which expresses his views. At the moment, it is a fluid situation. Things are changing by the day. Information is investigated by the day. We need to allow the time for every independent engineer to be able to provide and assure us we live in the building in the end. Is this building safe? And then to make it safe, what exactly needs to be done and where?
Professors, the report says there's evidence indicating the wrong size reinforcement bars are placed in the area, 20 millimetres rather than 28. Can you give us an idea of how bigger stuff up this is, and have you seen this before?
When a building is built, there are always minor changes to the design, and the issue is whether these were checked at the time. We've identified quite a number, and they're listed in the report, of construction, what we've called construction issues, but at this stage we have not been able to identify which of these is materially important versus the design. This is something that we're looking at further.
So the scale of this is like 20 millimetres rather than 28. Is that a thing you see in other big projects around Sydney, or is this I'm just trying to get an idea of the scale of this mistake?
It's difficult to actually say at this stage because 28 versus 20 millimetres, was it material to actually cause this failure? Was it checked during the construction process? At this stage, we're still doing investigations on that.
Was one of the precast panels, the precast panel in level 10 that cracked? Was it cracked when it was installed? Was there a hairline crack that was patched over?
It's been reported that there was some damage, but at this stage we haven't been able to confirm or otherwise whether this was material to the failure.
Do you know where that error might occur in all these issues? Was it in the hands of the engineer or the builder, or was there miscommunication perhaps?
As I've said, there's various reasons why changes occur during construction. At this stage, I wouldn't be able to say that they're an error because the builder may choose to make a change and that would then be checked. And this happens in all constructions. The issue for us is were any of these changes material to actually lead to the failure, and that we cannot comment on at this stage.
What's next in terms of this investigation? Who will you be speaking to? What's the next step?
We're still speaking with the engineers on a regular basis, and we're still obtaining information from them, and we're looking forward to receiving that information as soon as possible so that we can finalise our findings.
So there's 11 units in this building that are made available for affordable housing and by proxy owned by the state government. Will you be pursuing the builder or the developer at all in regards to those units?
Again, that's a level of legal recourse that, of course, will be SABRE will be pursuing. But again, any legal obligations, of course, will be met by the state government. But most importantly, with affordable housing, we've got a strong record of providing affordable housing in new buildings. Of course, we want to make sure that the people that are living in those are looked after, and it comes back down to, quite frankly, it's the safety and welfare of those residents and owners while this independent investigation is being undertaken.
So just to clarify, is that you're considering taking legal action, or the state government will be taking legal action?
Well, that would be about the SABRE.
Would you see a situation, Minister, where potentially a licensing regime for engineers would be something that this government could adopt, considering what we've seen over the last 3 weeks?
Well, that may come out of this final report, but certainly I understand Minister Keane will be taking a number of recommendations to the federal body in early February.
Has the New South Wales government received any advice about its liability as the developer of this project?
That would be a matter for the SABRE.
Mark, do any of the defects point to this being a rushed building job or cheaply done?
We haven't any evidence that this has been caused by the speed or any desire to cut costs as a part of this, but we're still investigating.
Is it possible, for example, that some of the concrete that's cracked may not have been cured or set for the appropriate amount of time?
To date, we haven't identified any issues with the materials which we used in the building, but we still have some data in regards to that aspect to review.
Feel pretty confident that all these precast panels that are all around Sydney, that there's no great fault with them.
In principle, we see no issue with precast panels.
You've had quite an in-depth look at the process of building one apartment block here. Are there any sort of systemic issues that you've identified, any lack of oversight or anything that you personally have an opinion on? There's nothing that we've clearly identified to date, but it's also something that we'll be looking at the later stage of our investigation.
Professor, you've recommended that there's independent oversight and review by qualified structural engineers before major works begin. Does WSP not qualify as independent in that sense?
I think that came up in an earlier question, but WSP has done the original design, and it's our recommendation with the rectification works that this be independently checked. It's not an uncommon process in other parts of engineering.
Has the process that the development went through for development approval been looked at as to whether or not there were any deficiencies and how it was assessed?
Again, with respect to development approval, it is somewhat different to the actual construction that occurs. With respect to state significant development, there is a very transparent, robust process that people need to go through in order to build the building. Now, that is undertaken by our department, but with respect to the actual construction, of course, that's outside of our jurisdiction.
Because there doesn't seem to be any structural report that's been lodged with the development application of this building. Is that unusual?
The construction report, again.
The structural report.
The structural report. Now, what do you need to understand? People need to understand that there is a difference between planning and there is a difference between planning and the actual construction. So planning, it's the actual design, the interaction of that building with its surrounds. It's where we ensure there's park plans, there's good design, and then with respect to the actual construction, that's where you have legislation that ensures and regulation that the National Construction Code standards are met. And we have some of the highest standards in New South Wales, and indeed, this country when it comes to construction.
It was part of the environmental assessment requirements as part of the planning process, but it doesn't seem to be included in the documents.
One of the things we look at when we undertake state significant development assessments is we look at things like traffic flow, impact on local neighbours, height, so the impact on the local area of a construction, whether it's a road construction, a building construction, a bridge construction, a rail construction. What we don't actually do as part of the planning process is get into the detailed engineering of the structure. That happens for a building certification, which is a separate process. So our job in the planning department is to work out what things can happen where and what the impact is on those on local neighbours, but not actually to get into the actual construction of the infrastructure.
But the question was, the department specifically requested a structural report, and there wasn't one provided. So why was that a failure of the department to approve the project, or why was it requested in the first place?
It's not a typical thing that we request. It basically, as I said, we're looking at the impact on the local area, the ability for roads to, infrastructure construction. We don't look at the actual, we look at height, we look at floor space ratios because they have an impact on traffic and other things, but we don't look at the detailed design of a building
If you look
itself.
at geotechnical studies and you look at, other structural qualities of the building to see if...
That happens through two processes, through a building certificate and through the certification process, not through the planning process.
It's part of the DA, part of the environmental assessment of the project.
The DA does look at environmental issues, so I would look at things such as impact on noise impacts, it would look at, health impacts and so on. It doesn't get to the detailed construction.
The use of precast material now is engineering around, it's global, everyone uses that. Do our standards meet the highest level of those global practices?
We haven't yet looked at detail in that. We are looking further at the standards and the certification processes, etc.
I might ask the Secretary, with SOPA and, was there a voluntary planning agreement or anything of the like between the developer and SOPA in terms of lifting heights and that sort of thing for the affordable housing?
My understanding, there was an agreement between the developer and SOPA.
There was, did you say?
An agreement, yes.
And what was the basis of that agreement?
Well, I don't have the details with me. I'd have to take those questions offline.
Okay. Minister, as a result of that, are you worried about how these voluntary planning agreements are entered into, considering it is the developer who's making a fortune out of this and the government and the taxpayer may not be better off?
I just wanted to make it clear, I wasn't talking about a voluntary planning agreement. I was talking about a general agreement between the developers, not a voluntary planning agreement.
Okay, so there wasn't a
whether there's a voluntary planning agreement, I need to check that for you.
As a general sense?
Look, generally, voluntary planning agreements between the consent authority, the council and the developer provides such things as affordable housing, provides for additional FSR with respect to better design. But can I say it's one thing that we are definitely looking at when it comes to improving the transparency around construction in New South Wales. That's something that the government will be reporting back on shortly.
In your view, does it open the door or leave the door open for potential corruption?
Well, I've been on the record saying that we need more transparency around agreements between councils, for example, and developers when it comes to height, scale and so forth. Certainly, one would argue that around voluntary planning agreements, they can be opaque at times. And again, I've been on the record stating that that's one of the areas of reform that we're looking closely at to ensure that the community is kept informed around what is in those agreements and that there is transparency and consistency around those agreements.
Professor, it says here in the report that you're yet to receive all requested materials related to design and construction. Are the builder and engineers obfuscating? It's been over 3 weeks now since it happened. Why haven't they provided what you've requested?
There's a lot of materials. It's quite complex. We're also finding we receive materials that we're asking for further clarification, and we're in the middle of that process at the moment.
But why wouldn't they just give it all to you up front so you can do the work you need to do?
A part of the reason is that there is a huge volume of material for this whole building, and therefore we've been focusing on specific materials which we need.
Have they refused to provide any information that you've requested?
Not today, no.
Thanks.
Thank you. Nelly, E for dog, E for egg, R for Roger. You get it wrong, I'll be embarrassed.
Slow down. Slow down. Go again. So go a second time. And what is Shady?
Shady, S-H-A-D-Y.
Okay.
Surname Iskander.
Okay.
E-S-K-A-N-D-E-R.
Are you back in your home?
Absolutely not.
Shady.
Thank you all. A very happy New Year to you.
What level are you on? I'm on level 34 and 27.
Sorry, Shady,
there are two hats that I have. I'm the chair of the body corporate, and I'm also the chair of the executive committee which has been formed as a result of this, which is not related to the body corporate. Two separate entities. One looks after the common ground of the building, one looks after the lots within inside the building.
What do you do for a living, Shady?
I run a pharmacy chain and medical centres. I'm a pharmacist by profession.
But at the moment, it's looking after the building.
I've left that all to make sure that...
Have you? Oh, okay, you're taking time off.
Yeah, to ensure the residents are looked after in the most effective way possible. We've been working with the Minister. He's been very supportive in this whole process.
And where are you staying at this moment? Are you in a hotel? Are you...
I'm actually staying with family.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.